I think in my whole life of so many years of food photography, I have opened the color wheel once. Once. That is it. Because for me, color is intuitive, it's artistic, and yet somehow I feel like I always do end up creating a cohesive and a strong color palette. In fact, color is a huge part of my artistic style. It is how I convey energy and radiance in my photography. And this one step is how I check whether I'm actually being able to create that cohesive harmony, that balance, that energy that I have in mind. So, what is this one step? I'll tell you. This is your host, Dyutama, but you can call me DJ. And I love to inspire food photographers to dream. I spent 15 years as an architect studying buildings and constructing hospitals before taking the biggest leap of faith of my life, which was setting up a food styling and food photography business right from scratch. If you're a dreamer like me, wanting to start a new photography business or grow your existing food photography business, jump right into a world where I share practical, actionable strategies to improve your photography skills, to work with clients, make more money, all with a fearless mindset. This is the My Food Lens podcast, and we take you one step closer to your dreams. So let's go. Welcome to another episode of the My Food Lens podcast. And you are going to absolutely love this colorful episode because it is all about color. We all love color in food photography, don't we? And what you're going to hear on this episode is my very unconventional approach to using color. Basically, I'm going to share ways that you can use color fearlessly. It's not just always falling back on the color wheel, but actually breaking away from it, creating openly and still being intentional with your decisions without getting stuck or caught up in unnecessary overthinking. Sounds liberating, doesn't it? I'm also going to help you simplify your process of working with color with an easy practice that you can actually just incorporate into your workflow. You see, color is a very, very important part of food photography because we eat with our eyes first, and color and texture play a massive role in conveying flavor through our photography. That's the subject, right? So we have to convey flavor, and color and texture play a massive role in that. In fact, a large part of creating a strong photo, having powerful storytelling, and being able to get results from a photo depends on the colors. Haven't you ever observed the impact that the colors of a photo can have on you? Right? And that's the reason why we love the work of some photographers. And it has a lot to do with the way they work with color. Some work with lots of color. Like me, I love lots of color. However, I do also use a lot of monochrome palettes. I often work with different kind of palettes, not that you would see in the color wheel. And I know some photographers who only work with browns, who only work with beige, who only work with greens. So we all have a different take on color and the way we see color in our artistic style. But many a times we overthink color and we even limit ourselves to the color wheel. And sometimes we just want to play around with color, but we doubt ourselves whether we are making the right decision because it appears differently on the color wheel, or maybe something that we have not seen other photographers work with. So I'm going to tell you 3 easy ways to work with color, which are a bit different from what you may have heard before. And that will just be liberating and make your life more free and creative. All right. The first one is to limit the colors in your frame. So the less colors you have, the less coordination you need. You see, the less complexity, the better it is. So I find it very effective to actually just work with 2 colors within a frame. And it can be any 2 colors. It doesn't matter what the heck the color wheel says. I just pick my colors based on the hero or the food color. I worked with palettes like blue and red, which is not what you always see, right? I had a red beverage, and I've also worked with brown and green, something you use all the time because brown and green appears in nature and it is so soothing and so relatable to us. So for this one, I had green cookies and I used a brown theme. I've also used something like orange and browns together, or pink and reds. So picking two colors makes decision making very, very easy. What's also fun about working with two colors is that the color count doesn't include blacks and whites. So, for example, if you have a chocolate cake with red raspberries on a white plate, I would still count that palette as brown and red. I would not typically count the white plate because usually whites and blacks, unless, of course, they are your main colors, we can kind of count them out and basically focus on the primary two main colorful colors in our frame. But sometimes we can have black and white as our main colors, and that is different. Then you have to count it, and we'll get to that very soon. But working with two colors is actually incredibly easy. And sometimes we can have a third color in the frame, like the red beverage that I was talking about, the red and blue palette. I had a red beverage in the frame and I used a blue backdrop. I used ice cubes as props. What does that do? It reflects the blue on the backdrop because those ice cubes were actually sitting on the backdrop. So I have a red drink, a red beverage. I have a blue backdrop. And then I place ice cubes on the blue backdrop. And those ice cubes kind of have this texture and they have shadows and they have form, but they are reflecting the blue of the backdrop. And then I introduced a third color, which was yellow. And these were lemon wedges that I used as garnish. So it was very important that the yellow was used strategically and that it complemented the hero. And basically, using that pop of color as a garnish, I was not taking away the attention from the drink, but I was actually emphasizing the hero by adding that pop of color on the hero. There was no other yellow on the frame. There was just a red beverage with yellow garnish sitting on a blue backdrop, and that yellow was only on the red. So the color palette was still primarily red and blue, but it had a third color, which was yellow, and that's okay. I was still limiting my colors. So don't feel restricted when I say use only two colors. You can still have a third color. You can also introduce a fourth color as you need. But remember, as an original palette, you should have two colors that really emerge as the main palette. And then you can use a third or fourth to just kind of pop or complement that two color palette. So it should not break the harmony, but it should add on it. And don't fall back on the color wheel. Always let your creative mind flow and get wild and crazy because the color wheel is not the Bible. All right. Just remember that you do need to make your hero food stand out. So choose your own two colors. So if you choose brown and red, you know that red always takes more attention. So be mindful of the amount of red you put in the frame if red is not your hero color. Like the chocolate with raspberries. We know brown is our hero color, but we put red to make our brown pop. So make sure that your hero color is still taking the center stage, and limiting color is a great way to simplify the process of working with color, get more freedom in choosing your color, and actually creating a very strong palette. So the second way, and this is going to be a bit different from maybe what you've heard before, but tap into the power of blacks and whites. Now, how often do we think of white and black as colors in food photography? Not so often, right? I mean, it's not the first color that will come to your mind. Oh, I need to, shoot a black food. Or, white food is more common, but still, usually it's greens and oranges and yellows and colorful food and curries and salads and pies. And those are the things. So black and white is not typically the primary palette that we create for our food. But neutral colors like black, white, dark, cream colored props, backdrops, they can actually help to balance colors. So we need to tap into their powers. And just like I mentioned, that when we use two colors, we usually don't count blacks and whites, right? Just building on that same idea, when we are working with color, and sometimes we feel stuck and we feel like, oh my God, there's so much going on. Or sometimes we feel like, oh, there's so much missing, like something's off. Think of blacks and whites. Pause at that point and think whether adding any blacks or whites will actually help you. And you don't always have to add more. We talked about adding a third color in your two color palette. You don't always have to add an extra color. Sometimes what you need is to add a neutral. Sometimes what you need is to add a white. Sometimes what you need is to add a black, and maybe even replace some of the colorful elements with either darks or lights to create that vision, to create that strong photo that you have in mind. So let's say you have a very colorful, savory tart. It's a mixed vegetable tart. Okay, you have also have green garnish on it. Let's say that. Now, visualize this with me. Okay, we have this beautiful, colorful vegetable tart. And what I'm looking at right now is this beautiful baked crust with lots of color. We have orange and yellow and green and pink veggies, and it just feels like a beautiful garden on top, and it has a little bit of that green garnish, so it has a lot of texture and shadow and depth as well. And then I'm just getting so ambitious. So when I look at that beautiful tart in my frame, I'm like, do you know what? I have this napkin. I really want to use this napkin in my frame. Or maybe a pink backdrop. And I'm like all excited about this new pink backdrop that I brought. And I'm like, I just want to use that pink backdrop. That's fine. What I'm saying is do not be afraid. I love color, and so should you as a food photographer, food blogger, and anyone who loves food. We love color. We just need to balance the colors. And for me, I do it by introducing some blacks or whites in the frame. So think of placing that tart. Okay, we're going back to the tart scene. Think of placing that tart, that very colorful tart, on a white or a black plate, again, depending on your mood, light or dark. Think of placing it on a white or black plate and then introducing a napkin, which means more color. So you could place the napkin where you desire, but then think of your backdrop. Your tart is sitting on that white plate and you have this bright pink napkin that's sitting there. So what can balance this? Maybe you need a different color backdrop. Not pink on pink, but maybe you need a white or a cream or a dark backdrop. So what I'm trying to say here is be open to shifting things around and moving things around and tapping into the power of neutrals if you want to introduce and have more color. You can still have a colorful frame. You can have a beautiful garden-like multicolored vegetable tart and a beautiful pink napkin on the side. Just try to bring a little bit of balance with a white plate or backdrop that is neutral, anything that makes the color palette stronger and makes your hero pop. Because it not only balances the color, it pops the colors, so it strengthens your palette. So what we learned in point number 1 was try to limit your colors. All right, try to see if you can work with 2 colors, 2 main colors, maybe introduce a third one if needed. And then we learned that balance out those colors by tapping into the power of neutrals, blacks, and whites. So anytime you feel something is missing, if there's too much going on, immediately think of, do I want a neutral here? Will a black look better? Will a white look better? Will this balance out better? Will it pop more? So tap into the power of blacks and whites. And now I want to talk about the third way to work with color. And this is also a step that you can introduce in your workflow. I do this all the time, and I barely ever go back to the color wheel to check anything. I think in my whole life of so many years of food photography, I have opened the color wheel once. That is it. Because for me, color is intuitive, it's artistic, and yet somehow I feel like I always do end up creating a cohesive and a strong color palette. In fact, color is a huge part of my artistic style. It is how I convey energy and radiance in my photography. And this one step is how I check whether I'm actually being able to create that cohesive harmony, that balance, that energy that I have in mind. So, what is this one step? I'll tell you. This one step is to check your colors. I know it's not earth shattering, and yet it's earth shattering. So, checking your photo before you switch off the camera is a very easy way to make sure that you're working on a par palette, that you're powerful, that your colors are just absolutely boom, boom, rock, chak, shakalaka, boom. It's just really magical. And all you have to do is create what you want, of course, keeping a lot in mind of balance and, everything we talked about. And somewhere where you are close to being done, just pause. Now look at your photo, look at the screen, wherever you have the photo appearing, and focus only on the colors. Don't look at anything else. Just look at the colors, maybe squint your eyes a little bit. Just start looking at the colors and then start pointing at the colors and say them out loud. So let's say you have the chocolate raspberry cake, say red, 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 wherever you're seeing the reds, wherever there are raspberries or maybe any red props or anything red. Then move on to the next color. Brown, 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 brown. Then look at the next color. Start looking at your colors. Look at it. Observe it. Then say orange, 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 orange. Maybe there's something orange in the frame. So basically what you are doing is checking whether, number one, is there any color that is appearing only once? And if it's appearing only once, it needs attention. Now, any color that appears once should be dealt very, very carefully. I have seen photos of photographers who will have this beautiful chocolate cake on a rustic wooden backdrop, and they will have some maybe yellow garnish or maybe some sprinkles, something like that, which is a very warm kind of a palette. And then on the side, they will go ahead and put blue flowers. Or they will introduce a knife or a piece of cutlery, which will be blue. And it is just warm, cool. And it'll be the one place where that fork is appearing, which has this blue handle, and it just breaks everything. It's just not cohesive. So when we do this check and when we say the colors out loud, the moment we hit a point where we are just like, oh, blue, but this is the only place where I have blue, that's it. Ta-da! Alarm starts to ring in your mind and you're like, check, check now. I need to pay attention here. So any color that appears only once should either really be the hero. You could have a blue cake and that is absolutely fine. And then you can have reds and oranges and all the warm tones, but your hero is blue. It's the only thing that's standing out, and that's perfectly fine. So that's one way to deal with a color that's appearing only in one place. Or it should be somewhere on the side where it's actually complementing the palette and not breaking the harmony of the other colors. So if you have these browns and reds and rustic tones that are appearing, and then you go ahead and put a fork on the plate, which is blue, suddenly your attention is going to the blue fork. And that's not our hero. And that's breaking that flow that the audience or the viewer is seeing. So in this chocolate raspberry photo, let's say we have a chocolate raspberry photo, we have orange and reds, but if we want to use, okay, let's use a more palette friendly, like this warm palette friendly color, let's say green. So we just talked about brown and green being a color that appears in nature, right? Maybe not blue. Blue is just too striking, too obvious that it might not be the right choice. However, it could be the right choice if it's used strategically. So don't get me wrong. Remember, you are the artist. But at the same time, let's also be mindful of what we want the viewer to focus on. So come back to the chocolate raspberry photo. Let's say that you have the orange and reds and browns in it, but you want to use a green napkin or maybe green cutlery. Now, you know that the majority of the colors are basically lying in the range of reds, orange, browns, and green is just a little bit different. You also know that your main hero is not green, which means this color is probably appearing only on one location, only in one place, which means it has to be less in your face. It has to be less in quantity. and it has to be in a less prominent location. If it's a napkin, you could probably peek it from the side where it's cropped, or maybe it's underneath the plate where it's making the brown cake pop, or maybe it's just supporting in general somewhere where it's drawing the attention of the viewer and bringing the focus back into the main hero, where it is just adding to the flow of the photo. So let's say it's cutlery. Make sure that it's tucked in a bit and it's not too bright, that the light is not completely falling on that green, and the green is not the only thing that's shining in the frame. We don't want to take away the focus, even though it might be the vintage green fork that your grandmother left you. Maybe it's something that you paid a lot of money for. Maybe it's the most beautiful prop in your collection. Unless it's not a prop photo, that prop is not your hero. Okay. I know it's a tough thing for us to hear because sometimes we love our props more than our food. I get it. Me too. But remember, if it's a color that's appearing only in one place or it's got a very small quantity, we cannot make our eye go to it as the first thing. So we can definitely have a green fork tucked on a plate, but tuck it in. And you know what? Maybe add a little bit of raspberry around it. And, maybe it has some crumbs on it. It should be sitting in a way where it doesn't say, look at me, look at me, look at me, I'm here, look at me. It should be sitting cohesively with the other player colors. Basically, it should be a team player. It should be complementing them. Okay. And having that little cake on the cutlery is such a great way to create a natural composition because it also helps to break the continuity of that green color and add a bit of brown. So there's this connection of the brown cake, the main hero, and it kind of visually connects the crumb on the fork. And it says that these two have a connection. Okay, now this concept is a bit complicated in terms of composition, and maybe we can cover it in another episode. If you're interested for me to dive into this relationship in compositions between the different elements, because boss, I love compositions. I mean, the architect in me is just like buzzing when we have to create compositions. And so if you go on my Instagram feed, you will see like all these fun compositions. And I deal with my compositions like a family, like emotions. And I have a very unscientific and an unconventional approach in how I approach my compositions because I feel like it's all art. And so if you are interested in learning more about a fun, easy way of creating very strong, powerful compositions, drop me a line, okay? But going back to that crumb on the green fork, basically it establishes a relationship between the main hero cake and the fork. And it says that we belong together. And at the same time, it breaks the prominence or the majestic appearance or the, just standing outness of the green fork. So when we check our photo, when we say the colors out loud, we can actually easily tell if we are working with a cohesive palette or not. And when we see a color appearing just once or twice, suddenly your brain should be buzzing and you should be questioning that decision. You should actually be reevaluating whether it is a good decision or it is something that needs to be replaced. Now, that replacement, it could be a black or white or neutral. So remember that sometimes we need to add something more and sometimes we need to remove something. So be ready to tweak that color palette. And remember, in all probability, once you remove something, your palette, your photo, and your composition only gets stronger. Okay? So checking and speaking out the colors is a great practice to include in your workflow. Don't get lazy. Don't just rely on squinting your eyes and just seeing things around. Start speaking it. It sends a different message to your brain and it activates a different kind of decision-making process. Otherwise, I would not have told you to do so. Okay? So there you go, boss. 3 ways to make working with color fearless, easy, intentional, and so fun. So break away from that color wheel. The color wheel is great, but photography and the use of color is art. So splash it and have fun. It is your art. You can take it in any direction and don't let anyone else's opinion on certain colors stop you from using colors and combinations the way you want them to be. The color wheel is there to help you. And if you're ever stuck, you want new ideas, definitely fall back on it. That's why it exists. But it's not the Bible, there's no rules. You break the rules. In fact, it's always most striking when you break the rules and you break away from conventional color palettes. So don't get stuck. Don't overthink. Just limit your colors, tap into blacks and whites, and check back. All right? Simple, but so powerful. So go and create away. And if you absolutely loved this episode, send me an email on hello@myfoodlens.com or DM me on Instagram at Gitama_myfoodlens. And if you had a lot more fun, why don't you go ahead and rate this podcast? If it has been helpful, you've learned something new today. If you're on Apple Podcast, go help write one sentence of review for us. If you're on Spotify, hit the stars and tell us you love the show. All right, with that, I'll see you next week in another episode. Until then, bye-bye.